In a healthy family, our roles are more dependent on who we are as human beings, as autonomous, authentic human beings. These roles in the dysfunctional family are coping strategies. So, who we really are, our own authenticity, our own autonomy, that's not encouraged. Hey, friends, welcome to Genuine Life Recovery with me, Jody Stevens, helping you and your loved ones get and stay sober from addictions and codependency as well. So, today's show, Addiction and Family Dynamics. Today is part one of Addiction Family Dynamics. We're going to be talking about that for the next two shows, maybe three. Please share this channel on social media or with anybody you know who struggles with addiction or codependency issues. Maybe it's you, maybe a loved one, maybe somebody in your family. Thank you so much for doing that. And please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the little bell. That way, each time I post a new video, you will be notified. So, addiction and family dynamics. What in the world is that all about? Well, they've studied addiction and they've studied the ways families relate to each other in families where there is an addiction or really codependent behavior around like a system, whether it's a person who's an alcoholic or an addict or a rageaholic and things like that. So in the earlier days of addiction recovery and counseling, which hasn't been that long ago, it was pretty normal to just treat the addict, right? So we would just be looking at how do we get the addict to stay sober? Well, pretty soon it became clear that it wasn't just the addict. There was this whole family dynamic surrounding addiction. There was family roles, which we'll get into. There was usually an enabler or what's traditionally called codependency, although many addicts are also codependent and vice versa. That was me. I was an alcoholic as well as codependent. And so I had to work through all of those issues. And you can find out more about can an alcoholic be codependent and what is codependency in a bunch of different videos that I put out. So check out some of those videos and other episodes as well too on addiction and codependency. So families play a large part in the helping the addict either stay sober or helping them not get sober, right? Most of us who've been in addiction recovery long enough, we'll be like saying, oh my gosh, it's your mom that's triggering you, or your brother doesn't want you to get sober, or things like that, because there's this thing called homeostasis, okay? And what that means is that in family systems, they tend to balance themselves out in response to change or in response to dysfunction. So in healthier families, there's room for autonomy. There's room for healthy emotional growth. There's room to express who we are, express our emotions in a healthy way. In dysfunctional families, when there's an addict or more than one addict, what happens is we're trying to cope with a situation that shouldn't be. So we develop roles, we develop dysfunctional coping mechanisms, we stuff our feelings, we tiptoe around dad, we do things like this. And so let's say dad is an alcoholic, and when he's drinking, you don't want to talk about certain things. You walk around eggshells on dad. Maybe it's common to stay in your room. So, what happens is there's a system of rules where we don't talk about certain things or do certain things. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to set dad off, right? Whatever the case may be. And then usually it's not discussed, or if it is discussed, it's discussed through, deceit, where it'll be, dad has a hard job or a hard day. That's why he yells. Or where in this family dynamic, the actual instincts and feelings of usually the children involved are kind of invalidated because you're a kid and you're like, I think dad's drinking that stuff that makes him angry. And I think he's acting this way, but mom tells me that's not really what it is. And so we learn that our feelings and our experiences, we learn not to trust them and not to trust ourselves. And this is where, when we come from this kind of family dynamic, this is happening, especially to children, as their brains are developing. So it's kind of ingrained that they're learning these sort of dysfunctional coping skills, stuffing emotions, having their experiences invalidated, and things like that. So we're in this family dynamic, this kind of homeostasis type of thing is happening where we develop certain roles and coping mechanisms so that we can survive in this type of family dynamic. And we'll talk about those roles coming up. There's also, we don't learn good boundaries in an addictive, codependent family system as well. So a lot of times there's poor communication. There's a lot of negative interactions or negative experiences. So when we get older, we can avoid people or have kind of avoidant attachment disorders or different styles of what's called attachment disorders. I did an episode on that if you want to check that out, because we're we've been reinforced to have these kind of negative experiences with other people. So as we grow up and our brains have developed, it becomes kind of scary. So we have to relearn all this stuff. There can be a lot of chaos in families when the alcoholic is drunk and causing all kinds of problems, or yelling and screaming or breaking things. There can be physical and sexual abuse that's common in families like that. Dad's drinking, I got to run away, I got to hide, I don't want him to hurt me, right? Or mom, right? Or older brother or uncle, right? Whoever it is in that family dynamic. Or there could be just like, maybe it's a really abusive person. Maybe they don't drink, they're just really militant or abusive, right? Sociopathic, psychopathic, that kind of a thing where, and so there can be all this chaos. There can also be a lot of secrecy, right? Where we don't talk about our issues with other people. We don't, right? Because we don't want anyone to come over to the house, so we can be isolated from the community, right? We don't want anyone to come over and see what's really happening. Also, there can be just, there can be very codependent enmeshment, right? Like, mom and daughter, like where does she end and daughter starts? And they can be very enmeshed emotionally. Or there can be a family where it's very, very distant. So you walk into the house and everybody's in the same roof, but they're all alone. They don't talk, they don't communicate. And when they do, it's very much on the surface, right? Put on the TV or watch a movie, but don't ever talk about anything, right? And everybody does their own thing, right? Everybody's in their room, that sort of thing. So there can be a lack of togetherness, a lack of closeness. And so to cope with this family dynamic, there are roles that people play in this family dynamic. They've studied this, and these are just some common roles. These roles can be interchangeable too. So I'm just going to pull up this little thing here. So in dysfunctional families, they've identified like 4 to 6 roles. So there's the addict, right? This is the one where everybody kind of creates their role around the addict, the alcoholic, the rageaholic, the super codependent one. Everybody kind of creates their role around this person because they're the ones that dictate the dysfunction. I like that, right? Everybody tiptoes around them. Then there's the family hero. There's the family scapegoat. There's the mascot. My brother was the mascot. Sadly, he died of his addiction. Robin Williams is a perfect example of a mascot type personality, just so funny and you just love them, but they're just using it to hide all the pain. There's the caretaker, right? Some people could say, oh, that's mom, right? She enabled dad to drink. There's the lost child, right? I relate to that role the most. And so the addict is really the focal point of the family system. All the conflict and everything, right, is centered around the addict and their crazy choices and their behavior, right? The caretaker is often the enabler, right? The one that will do things like, well, we got to make sure dad doesn't drive drunk, so we have to fill the cabinet with enough beer so that he won't go back to the store. They will often hold two jobs and just the cover up what the addict's really doing. They may lie about the addict. They may call in sick for the addict and say that they have a toothache, whatever the case may be. We're all kind of familiar with that. A lot of times that person can be what's called codependent. You don't have to be Codependency as a whole encompasses a whole lot of things. You don't have to be codependent to be a caretaker, but a lot of times they kind of go together. And then there's the family hero. Maybe this is the daughter who's super self-sufficient and she gets straight A's and she takes care of mom when she has a migraine because dad's drunk and she's overwhelmed because so she has to help out with the family chores and take care of things because, right, mom can only do so much, right? Because the addict or the alcoholic typically isn't helping out around the house. They're not doing anything but getting wasted and raging and causing all kinds of problems. So, right, usually there needs to be more than one person trying to take care of the kids, doing stuff like that. A lot of times the older kid could be that person. They're the hero. Then there's the scapegoat, who's typically the problem child. And a lot of times the scapegoat who just creates all kinds of chaos, diverting attention from the addict's behavior, right? Just maybe they start doing drugs or maybe they're picking fights or they're doing all kinds of things. But a lot of times the scapegoat is the one that recognizes the BS. We may think the family might put the scapegoat into therapy. You got to help my kid. He's acting out when in reality, dad's an alcoholic, mom's overworked. Really, the problem is the family, and this is why treating the whole family system is so important when possible. Then you have the mascot, and that was my brother was a mascot, and that's the sort of the funny guy or gal, the comedian, the one that diverts everything away from the pain, that makes everybody laugh, right? And they're just funny, and they can be just a regular comedian. And then you have the lost child, which is funny. That was more me. And it's interesting because my parents weren't alcoholics. My grandfather was, and my mother was super codependent. And so I grew up in just this. It was a dynamic of don't talk, don't feel that had a lot of rules. And it ended up both my brother and I became addicts and alcoholics. He sadly passed away and I got sober. So you don't always have to have a drunk or a heroin addict or something like that in the family to make it a dysfunctional family system, right? But these rules are pretty prevalent in addictive and codependent family systems. A lot of times it may skip a generation where grandpa drinks, but the kids don't, but then their kids do, because you're dealing with a way of coping, okay, that can pass from generation to generation, that makes it a higher risk for people to develop addictive, codependent ways of behaving and relating to the world. So again, somebody doesn't necessarily have to be an addict for you to see these roles and this rigidity and rigid rules and stuff like that. And so a lot of times, you have these roles. So you have the lost child, they kind of stay under the radar, right? They may be, reading a lot or just really quiet. For me, I was into all my music and stuff like that. And sometimes I would be funny like the mascot, and sometimes these roles are interchangeable, but typically the more the dysfunction, the more kind of rigid the roles become. So again, in a healthy family, our roles are more dependent on who we are as human beings, as autonomous, authentic human beings. These roles in the dysfunctional family are coping strategies. So who we really are, our own authenticity, our own autonomy, that's not encouraged. So that's why we often grow up very codependent and things like that, because we're struggling to even know who we are. Okay, does that make sense? And so in this family system, not only are there these roles, but there's a lot of rules, okay? And these are sort of unspoken rules um, that everybody obeys. This is a wonderful book. It's called Lost in the Shuffle. The Codependent Reality, and it's by a guy by the name of Robert Subby. It's an old book, and he was the one that really first began to discover how alcoholics and addicts are also super codependent, okay? Because he got sober from alcohol and then realized he was still totally miserable. This is exactly what happened to me. I couldn't stand up for myself. I had terrible boundaries. I didn't know who I was. I had all this guilt and shame because of invalidating of feelings and things like that. And so I had to work through the codependency issues and realize, oh my goodness, it's not so much the booze that was my problem. It was all these underlying codependency issues. So this book was really instrumental for me. But anyway, he talks about some of the family rules in the codependent family system. And one of those is that it's not okay to talk about problems, right? So we keep our feelings to ourselves. And a lot of times, right, because if there's an addict or someone else in the family, the sick person pretty much sucks the air out of the room. So we learn not to talk about our problems because a lot of the problems are centered around the dysfunction or the addict. So a lot of times there might be a big fight over something really stupid. Okay. But that's not the crux of the issue. Does that make sense? Because the real issue is the elephant in the room that the family ignores. Another rule is it's not okay to talk about or express our feelings openly. That's a no-no. When we do, oftentimes they may be invalidated because feelings often can make people uncomfortable, especially if they've been avoiding them for so long. So we may hear things like, don't feel that way, stop feeling that way, we don't know why you feel that way. Or you may say something like, gosh, you guys were fighting and screaming and things were breaking, and mom might say something to the effect of, oh no, we were just having a discussion. So you've kind of then learned that to not trust your own experience as a little kid, because you're seeing one thing, but you're being told to not see that that's not really true, and that feeling really isn't the case. And so this can cause a lot of problems as we get older in life. We don't trust our feelings. We don't trust our instincts. A very dangerous thing to do to kids. Another rule is don't address issues or relationships directly. This is a way to avoid intimacy, and it's called triangulation. It's this constantly bringing in of a third party, or if mom and dad are screaming, they drag the kid in and get the child involved in the drama, or they may say things like he mentions in here, it's you and me in the checkbook, right? Right. It's never just you and me. So there's a lot of triangulation and manipulation. Another rule is always be strong and perfect and good. Don't show any weakness. Another rule is don't be selfish. Don't ever put your needs first. If you do, you will experience lots of guilt, lots of shame. I grew up with tons of guilt and shame, and that fueled my addiction and my alcoholism and codependency and stuff like that. Don't ever put your own needs first. Don't ever put your own feelings first, because all the needs and feelings are going to the sick person, right? Another rule is do as I say, not as I do. So this is another challenge for people that grow up in an addictive or codependent family dynamic. Another way that we learn not to trust our own experiences or our own instincts, because we may be told, always be honest. And then we see the emotional dishonesty exhibited in our family. It can be subtle and hard to put our finger on. Or, don't ever drink, right? Well, mom or dad's getting loaded. The other one, too, is it's not okay to play. It's not okay to have fun, because in this type of family system, we have these rigid roles, and oftentimes interactions are dysfunctional, they're uncomfortable. There can be a lot of yelling, screaming, violent interactions. And so we learn that just really being free and not being full of anxiety or having fun and playing just simply isn't okay. What ends up happening is later in life, it feels like we have to work so hard, so much harder than everybody else, just to feel normal and just to be okay. Because remember, all this stuff is happening while our brains are developing, and that's all we know. Another rule is don't rock the boat. Right? Families stick together, don't rock the boat. We all have our role to play. Ignore the elephant in the room, right? We know dad's screaming and raging, but it's not really because he's an alcoholic, and it's not really because he can't manage anger. It's really because he had a hard day. So everybody just play their role, don't rock the boat, right? The homeostasis thing, right? And then everything will be fine. So so those are just some of the rules of the addicted family that they have identified. And again, these rules can fluctuate. So what can happen when we live by these rigid set of rules, this dysfunctional family dynamic can go on from generation to generation, right? Don't talk, don't feel, do as I say, not as I do. Don't express your feelings, stuff your feelings. We grow up, we have kids, we raise them in the same way. Then we wonder why there's these addictions and codependencies that go on from generation to generation. So this is why when someone is an alcoholic or an addict, or really codependent or things like that, there is reasons why, and it's really good in therapy if we can treat the entire family. Sometimes that's not always possible. A lot of times, the person who is enabling the addict, they want to keep the dynamic the way it is. It may be very familiar to them. Maybe their father was an alcoholic and they learned to be relevant by caretaking the alcoholic. It's a role that they play They don't want to get out of that role. So a lot of times you see this happen where someone tries to get sober and someone in the family is kind of resistant to them getting sober. A lot of times it's unconscious. They would never say, "Oh, I don't want my kid or my husband to get sober." But a lot of times the things that they do not encourage sobriety. Sometimes as an addict, if we're trying to get sober, there was probably chaos. And so, when we were younger, and so chaos, again, if you were taught to not be playful, to not connect in healthy ways, sometimes the adrenaline of chaos can be stimulating. Does that make sense? There are people from addicted families that they're kind of addicted to this chaos, to this fear. They're not really comfortable when things are normal. So this is why there's so many cognitive behavioral techniques in addiction counseling. And what that really means is just learning coping skills, because everything I just said, those are all dysfunctional coping skills. And we learned them at a very, very, very young age. So we can get older and we're trying to get sober and we're trying to live a better life, but we keep getting triggered because we don't know how to deal with conflict. We don't know how to deal with people. We don't know how to deal with anger. We don't know how to deal with anxiety. There's all these things that we need to relearn. And so it's very important, if you're struggling with an addiction, to recognize this. And I did a series on relapse prevention tips with a lot of great information on that. And I hope that you will check that out, because one of the things that's super important is a lot of times we try to get sober and we have a lot of relapses. And the reason we're relapsing is because we're using the addiction to cope, because we don't have healthy coping mechanisms and we don't have healthy boundaries. And it's not something that we can do alone. So it's very, very important to, if you have a child who's an addict or a spouse, to get the whole family into treatment and learn a different way of relating to each other. If you're older, sometimes it's not possible. You just need to get into treatment and learn ways of coping that are healthy so that you can deal with all these things, right? In AA and NA, they say life on life's terms. How do I deal with life on life's terms, when I was basically told at a young age that life's terms weren't really real? So that's why they say honesty is so, so important in addiction and recovery. So those are just some common roles we see in addicted, codependent, dysfunctional family systems, some common roles, some common rules. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful for you. And in the next episode, we'll continue talking more about family dynamics and also some of the struggles that adults may have that are what's called COA, or children of alcoholics. So we'll talk about that too. Again, please share this channel on social media or with anybody you know who struggles with addiction and codependency, maybe you or someone in your family. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the little bell. That way, every time I post a new video, you will be notified, and we will see you next time.